We're here for the fiscal year 23-24 disaster services budget workshop. And to start with the disaster services budget, and I'll turn it over to the clerk to start us off.
Okay. I have met with Dan on a couple of different occasions, and I've met with Jeff and Trish on the budget, and we came to a proposed, I guess, way that we're gonna budget for next year for disaster services. And that is to keep Dan at 30 hours a week on disaster services types of things, still a benefited position. So basically what you see here is the results of that. It's a 5% increase in his salary, and benefits stayed basically the same with the new rate, of course, but no changes there as far as what types of benefits. Meals and lodging are the same. We bumped up travel. No, we did too. We bumped up travel. Why was that? Oh,
For conferences,
for your conferences that he hasn't been going to.
one annual conference I gotta have.
Yeah, and office supplies was the same, telephone's the same. Fuel, we added fuel expense. We used to have fuel expense as part of vehicle expense, and I suggested we not have them combined like that because it's my understanding that we should be getting our fuel from the road department when we can, because we get it at a lower rate than we pay at the pump. And the only time you should be paying out of the road department's cash would be if you're traveling. It would save the county money. So everybody that has a car that goes has their own PIN or whatever, so it can code back, and then at the end of the year, or I would prefer it be quarterly or at least twice a year, get a report so that we can post it in here so they can keep track of where they're out on their fuel, their budget. Because the way it was before, you can't budget anything that way. So with that said, and based on the expenses they've had this year, we reduced the vehicle expense to $2,000 from $3,000, put in $300 worth of gasoline. Left advertising the same. Dues were increased, so I increased that. Data processing, left that at what it was, and emergency operations center left that what it was.
Emergency Operations Center, is that just like a,
That's money that's in there in case I need to set up an emergency operations center that I could go buy whatever I needed during that event. Cups and donuts and orange juice or something, whatever might be needed. Or if I needed to go temporarily rent a space or something, of that nature. We've never stood up an operations center, so we've never used that money, but it would be good to have a couple dollars in there. If we actually had an event going on, and once a disaster is declared, then there's a whole scenario of reimbursement for expenses that comes as part of the disaster. But this gives us something to be able to do something if we have just a semi-emergency that doesn't reach the levels of a disaster.
yeah.
It gives us something for it.
So Tammy, just help me as I'm trying to learn this process. At the bottom line, when I look at the bottom line of this thing, it says department request was 63.4 and budget officer request is 61.7. What's the difference?
That's what Dan asked for in his original request.
And then what you
And then
came
what
up
I
with
came up
after you
with. Correct.
talked
And then
to
if you
them.
look back at the fiscal year 23 and the budget amount, that's what it was budgeted for last year. So you can see what the difference is.
So a few of those line items that were reduced.
That's what made that difference.
It made it that difference.
So from 59 to 61.
Correct.
Are you, let's see, you mentioned office supplies. And that's one I worry about, the cost of everything going up.
And it does, yeah.
So, but we're still sticking with $500, even though he's already used most of that up. this year for the,
This
Right.
year, he moved to the airport this past year and had to re-outfit his space. And
Yeah,
so that's
so
why it's higher than what it
we-
normally is if, you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
We split
sometimes
off
you're
the
gonna look,
supplies with P and Z, and so when I moved out there, I did buy a fair amount of my own ink. And then I have a printer out there versus the copier,
Mm-hmm.
so it takes ink cartridges that cost more money.
and he bought his
So, yeah, we had
laptop
to-
and stuff in 22 and that changed to that, so.
So that's why we're near expensive, but yeah, 500 is probably fine.
Okay.
More. It's folks who figure it out to produce.
We have some area for change if we need to change that in this particular budget.
That was
Is
just
there
last
any-
year. Seems like it was a couple of years ago.
It does.
is there any income for your, for department?
Yes, you get reimbursed for half of his salary.
Well, yeah.
I owe you.
The grant amount.
It's a grant.
And so with the disaster services, we get the EMPG, the Emergency Management Program grant. And that this year is 32,000 and some change. And so we will get half of that. So 16,000 and some change, we will get reimbursed back for these operations expenses. So that's what I submit quarterly or biannually, and we get that reimbursement back.
And Tammy, I think you've answered this before. I'm just trying to learn. So where do income doesn't show up?
Not on this, anything that's under Fund 1, we have one revenue. It's 10, and everybody's revenue goes into that. So I will be providing you with that. I didn't bring the revenue. That's the only revenue he asked.
Thank you. I know you've answered that before. Okay. Any questions from the other commissioner?
No.
Any comments from you at this point?
Don't
Okay. Anything else that you would add to this? Okay, then I will open it to the public. Any questions?
Yeah, this is the sheet I got on the 17th of May.
Hmm,
The, one of the questions I have is workers' comp. You have any idea, Dan, if they list you, what they list you under as workers' comp?
Since there isn't one for disaster services manager, we've always used inspectors because it's one of the higher ones that you're potentially out in the field where you may trip and fall on something. And so we use the one for the factor for inspectors.
We have, actually have you as clerical.
For disaster or for P&Z?
Disaster.
I've always put it in
Or
my,
maybe I am
in my
looking at
request, it was
P&Z.
under inspectors.
Maybe I got the wrong one.
they all blur.
Well, I have 3 different ones, so.
But even in
Yeah, I
P&Z,
still have you under clerical.
but even in the P&Z budget, I was always done it as the admin was also
It's all
a little
just
bit
that.
higher rate. Because if you're out in the field, you trip and get hurt, the higher coverage for workers' comp.
Any other comment?
Just last comment is that 79% of the budget year has gone by, according to the paper, and almost 62% of the last year's budget's been spent, so you're, what, 17% on your budget, and you're asking for roughly $2,000 more.
That's probably a question that'll come up over and over. What would be,
And it just depends on when expenses fall too. Some expenses fall at the end
there's
of the
still-
year.
There's still more expenses to come, particularly fuel. Towards the end of the year here, and so we may be under, and part of that is because I've been sharing duties at P&Z, so I haven't been extending as much stuff through emergency management. But also the increase is mostly because of the increase in the COLA. We reduced other numbers versus increased any other numbers, so the increase is in the 5% increase over last year's budget.
Tammy, a question for you, because I don't understand the Viva very well, but do we withhold a Viva payment from his P and Z job as well?
Well, we were.
When I was dually, we did. And so last year, we only did
This one,
because I was only emergency manager for most of 22.
that's right.
So what would you like his VIBA to be?
Pardon?
What would you like his VIBA to be?
Oh, I don't know. Do we have other employees that get two VIBA?
No, they don't get two VIBAs. Well, they only get one VIBA. It's just how it's coded. So he was getting half out of, disaster services and half out of, P and Z. So I just had the 500 in there because it's a part-time job, but
No, I think that makes sense, but he gets the other part out
he
of the
doesn't,
other.
he won't because he's not gonna be in the planning and zoning budget.
Oh,
For next year.
For next year.
Right. This year he got $1,000.
Yeah.
Total.
yeah, so that makes sense.
So if you want it, yeah, if you want it to stay at 500, that's up to you guys.
Okay, that makes sense. I wasn't understanding, but I do now. All right, Matt, last chance?
Yeah, I don't know where Dan's planning on being with the disaster services when you're done with P and Z. If you're back at the airport, I think there should be rent on here because the airport should generate money from you being there, just like the police do. But they don't pay either, so,
No, but I have approached the sheriff about that.
yeah.
And we've discussed it in general, that should that be a way and could that be expensed and that conversation just hasn't gone to
It would
fruition. So,
require a grant.
I mean, it could be part of my operations expenses. It would just come out of this expenses and pay something else. So it's kind of a pull it out of one pocket and pull it in another pocket.
Yes, it is.
But certainly to show fairness or show, use of utilities then, or just facilities, that would make sense. Maybe there's some,
But would there be grant compensation for it?
it would be in a covered expense under my UPG.
So would it allow us more grant?
No.
Income? So it would take away from something else.
Wages,
Would take away from wages.
wages. That's what we
We
did.
would-
That we applied all the wages now.
We would include it in the operations for the position, which includes all of these expenses. And so that would be another, whatever the dollar amount is per year, we get reimbursed for that part. That's
Gotcha.
just part of our expenses, so.
Okay.
Say it's $1,000 a year, it would be $1,000 out of that 16,000, we'd get half of it.
Okay.
But it would be in lieu of some other expense, so.
So it'd have to come out of another pocket. Okay. Any further questions from you? Last one.
I understand,
Yeah.
it just cleans it up.
No, I agree.
Money.
No.
I guess my last statement is I heard 5% is added to the wages. Where'd that 5% come from?
5% added to the wages?
Yeah,
You mean cost of living?
that's what it is. I don't.
It's the COLA, yeah.
When was that decided?
Hasn't been decided, Matt. We had to throw
a
in a
workshop.
proposal, so this is a workshop. So we're proposing, trying to come up with a 5% cost of living, but that remains to be decided.